6 months later, Isabella stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, her hands trembling as she smoothed down her elegant black evening gown. The dress had been a gift from Robert, purchased specifically for this moment, her debut performance with the New York Chamber Orchestra. She could hear the murmur of the audience beyond the heavy curtains. Over 800 people who had come to hear tonight's program. The transformation had not been easy. Those first few weeks after accepting Robert's offer had been a whirlwind of legal paperwork, financial arrangements, and life-changing decisions. Isabella had quit all 3 of her cleaning jobs, a terrifying step that felt like jumping off a cliff even with Robert's guarantees in place. The hardest part had been learning to live without the constant pressure of survival. For 15 years, Isabella had woken up each morning knowing exactly what she had to do: work, earn money, pay bills, repeat. Suddenly, she had time to think, to dream, to remember who she used to be before life forced her into survival mode. Robert had arranged for her to work with Dr. Catherine Williams, a renowned piano instructor who specialized in helping professional musicians return to performing after long breaks. Their first meeting had been humbling. Dr. Williams had listened to Isabella play and then spent 2 hours identifying all the small technical flaws that had developed during her years away from serious practice. "Your musical instincts are still excellent," Dr. Williams had said, "but your technique needs work. 20 years of not practicing properly has created some bad habits we need to break." Isabella had thrown herself into practice with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. 8 hours a day at the piano, working through exercises that made her fingers ache and her back sore. Some days she felt like giving up, convinced that she was too old, too rusty, too far removed from the music world to ever truly return, but slowly, gradually, the magic began to come back. Her fingers remembered complex passages they had learned decades ago. Her hands regained their strength and flexibility. Most importantly, her confidence grew with each passing week. Robert had been true to his word about everything. Linda was now enrolled full-time in nursing school, her tuition and expenses completely covered. She was thriving academically, finally able to focus on her studies without worrying about money. Miguel had been accepted to 3 different colleges and had chosen to study engineering at Columbia University. Isabella's mother was receiving the best medical care available, her diabetes and blood pressure finally under control. The family had moved to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but clean and safe with enough space for everyone. Isabella had her own practice room with a beautiful upright piano where she could work without disturbing her family. 3 months into her musical comeback, Robert had arranged for Isabella to audition with the New York Chamber Orchestra. The audition had been terrifying, sitting in a large, empty concert hall playing for 3 stern-faced musicians, who took notes and whispered to each other between pieces. But when Isabella played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, something magical happened. The music transported her back to her student days at Juilliard when she believed anything was possible. She played with a passion and maturity that could only come from someone who had lived through real loss and found their way back to joy. The orchestra's director, Maestro David Chun, had offered her a spot as a featured soloist on the spot. "Your playing has something I rarely hear anymore," he had said. "Technical skill combined with genuine life experience. That's what makes music meaningful." Now, standing backstage at Carnegie Hall, Isabella felt the weight of how far she had come. In the audience, she knew her family was sitting in the front. Ro, Linda, Miguel, and her mother, all dressed in their finest clothes, all bursting with pride. Robert was there too, along with his business associates and friends from the music world he had introduced her to. But the person Isabella was thinking about most was Carlos, her late husband. She touched the simple wedding ring she still wore and whispered a quiet prayer. "I hope you can see this, mi amor. I hope you know that everything we went through led to this moment." A stage assistant appeared at her elbow. "Miss Santos, you're on in 2 minutes." Isabella nodded, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. She walked to the wings and looked out at the magnificent concert hall, its red velvet seats filled with expectant faces. The New York Chamber Orchestra was already on stage, instruments gleaming under the bright lights. Maestro Chun caught her eye and smiled encouragingly. He had become not just a colleague, but a friend over the past few months. Someone who understood the unique journey that had brought her to this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice echoed through the hall, "please welcome our featured soloist for tonight's performance of Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1 in E minor, Isabella Santos." Isabella walked onto the stage, her legs steady, despite her racing heart. The applause washed over her like a warm wave, as she felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly took her breath away. This was the moment she had dreamed of 25 years ago as a young student, the moment that had seemed impossible just 6 months ago. She sat at the beautiful concert grand piano, a Steinway even more magnificent than the one in Robert's penthouse. The orchestra waited quietly behind her, 70 professional musicians ready to follow her lead. Maestro Chun raised his baton, and Isabella placed her hands on the keys. The opening orchestral section began, building to the moment when the piano would enter. Isabella closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, feeling the familiar melody that had been part of her soul since she was a teenager. When her entrance arrived, her hands moved to the keys as naturally as breathing. The first notes rang out clear and strong, filling every corner of the concert hall. Isabella felt the music flowing through her, carrying with it all the pain and joy and struggle of the past 20 years. She played not just with her fingers, but with her entire being, pouring her life story into Chopin's beautiful melodies. In the audience, Linda had tears streaming down her face. She had never imagined her mother could create something so beautiful, so powerful. Miguel sat transfixed, finally understanding what his mother had given up for their family and what she had reclaimed through courage and determination. Isabella's mother sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, remembering the 7-year-old girl who had begged for piano lessons all those decades ago. She had known even then that her daughter had something special, and tonight the whole world could see it too. Robert watched from his seat with a mixture of pride and amazement. The woman on stage bore little resemblance to the frightened cleaning lady he had discovered playing his piano 6 months ago. This Isabella was confident, radiant, completely in her element. He had given her the opportunity, but she had done the real work of transforming herself. As the concerto moved through its 3 movements, Isabella felt herself becoming one with the music. Years of pain and struggle seemed to melt away, replaced by pure joy and artistic expression. This was who she was meant to be, who she had always been underneath the uniforms and the exhaustion and the fear. The final movement built to its spectacular conclusion, Isabella's fingers flying across the keys and passages that would challenge any professional pianist. The orchestra swelled behind her, creating a wall of sound that filled the hall with triumphant beauty. When the last note faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience exploded into applause, people leaping to their feet, in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Isabella stood and took her bow, her face shining with happiness and disbelief, but the evening was about more than just a successful performance. In the months that followed, Isabella's career blossomed in ways she had never dared to imagine. She was invited to perform with orchestras across the country, to record an album of Chopin pieces, to give master classes at music conservatories. More importantly, she had become an advocate for others like herself, talented people whose dreams had been deferred by circumstances beyond their control. Working with Robert, she established a foundation that provided financial support and performance opportunities for musicians from working-class backgrounds. The foundation's first recipient was a young janitor from Brooklyn who played violin with extraordinary skill during his lunch breaks. Just like Isabella, he had been invisible to the world around him until someone took the time to listen. Robert's life had changed too. The discovery of Isabella's talent had opened his eyes to the hidden gifts of people he had previously overlooked. He began paying attention to the stories of his employees, his building staff, the people who made his comfortable life possible. He found artists, inventors, writers, and dreamers working in jobs that barely paid their bills. Some nights, Robert would sit in his penthouse listening to Isabella practice on his piano, which she now used regularly. The cold, empty space had become warm and alive with music. Friends and colleagues began visiting not just for business meetings, but for impromptu concerts and musical evenings. Isabella's children flourished in their new circumstances. Linda graduated from nursing school at the top of her class and was immediately hired. Maria had been working at the community college for 3 years now, but most people barely noticed her. Every evening at 5 o'clock, she would arrive with her cleaning cart, moving quietly through the hallways like a ghost. The music building was her favorite place to work, though she never told anyone that. She would start in the practice rooms, wiping down the piano benches and music stands. Sometimes she would find sheet music left behind by students. She couldn't read music properly, but she loved looking at the notes scattered across the pages like tiny black birds on telephone wires. The symbols meant nothing to her officially, but somehow they spoke to her heart. The main concert hall was always her last stop. This room was special. It had high ceilings that made her footsteps echo, and in the center sat the most beautiful piano she had ever seen. It was black and shiny, reflecting the overhead lights like a mirror. The college called it a grand piano, and Maria understood why. Everything about it seemed grand and important. When she cleaned this room, Maria would work extra slowly. She would dust every surface twice, mop the floor in perfect lines, and arrange the chairs just right. But what she really wanted was to touch those keys just once, just to hear what sound they would make under her fingers. She never did, though. That piano was not for people like her. It was for students who paid thousands of dollars to attend classes. It was for professors with degrees hanging on their walls. It was for people who wore nice clothes and spoke with confidence about things like Mozart and Beethoven. Maria wore the same blue uniform every day. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning, and her English still carried the accent from the small town where she grew up. She was invisible to most people, which was exactly how she preferred it. Being invisible meant being safe. Being invisible meant no one would judge her or tell her she didn't belong, but late at night, when the building was completely empty, Maria would sometimes sit in the back row of the concert hall and close her eyes. She would imagine herself walking up to that beautiful piano, sitting down on the bench and playing the most amazing music. In her dreams, her fingers danced across the keys like she had seen in movies. In her dreams, people would gasp and applaud and tell her she was wonderful. Then she would open her eyes, finish her cleaning, and go home to her small apartment. At home, Maria had a secret. Hidden under her bed was a piece of cardboard that she had carefully drawn piano keys on with a black marker. She had counted the keys on the real piano at work and made sure her cardboard version had exactly the same number. 88 keys she had learned from watching videos on her phone. Every night after work, she would pull out her cardboard piano and practice. She would watch YouTube videos of people playing beautiful songs, pausing and rewinding to see exactly where their fingers went. She would try to copy their movements on her silent cardboard keys, pressing down on the drawings and imagining the sounds they would make. Her neighbors never heard any music coming from her apartment. They had no idea that Maria spent hours every night learning songs by heart, training her fingers to remember complex patterns, building up the muscles in her hands and wrists. They didn't know that she had taught herself to play entire pieces by Chopin and Rachmaninoff on a piano that made no sound at all. Maria had discovered classical music by accident. One evening while cleaning the concert hall, she had noticed that someone had left their phone behind. When she picked it up to take it to the lost and found, the screen lit up and music started playing. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Soft and sad and hopeful all at the same time. She quickly took the phone to security, but that night she went home and searched for the same kind of music on her own phone. She learned that it was called classical music and that the piece she had heard was called a nocturne. She spent the whole night listening to different nocturnes, letting the music wash over her like warm water. From that night on, Maria became obsessed with classical piano music. She would listen while she cleaned, using earbuds so no one would No, she would watch videos of famous pianists performing in grand concert halls, their fingers flying across the keys so fast they seemed to blur. She would study their hand positions, their posture, the way they moved their bodies with the music. The more she learned, the more she wanted to play. Her cardboard piano became her most precious possession. She would practice scales and arpeggios that she had learned from online tutorials. She would work on pieces slowly, measure by measure, until she could play them perfectly in her mind. Sometimes during her lunch break, she would sit outside the practice rooms and listen to the music. Students. She could tell when they made mistakes, when they played with feeling, when they were just going through the motions. She began to understand that playing piano was not just about pressing the right keys in the right order. It was about telling a story, about sharing emotions, about connecting with something bigger than yourself. The professors and students at the college treated Maria with polite indifference. They would smile and nod when they saw her, maybe say good evening or thank you when she cleaned around them. But they never really saw her as a person with dreams and talents and feelings. To them, she was just part of the building's maintenance. As essential but invisible as the heating system or the lights, Maria didn't mind being overlooked most of the time. It gave her the freedom to observe and learn without anyone asking questions. She knew which students were naturally gifted and which ones struggled. She knew which professors were patient and kind and which ones were harsh and demanding. She knew the building's rhythms and secrets better than anyone, but sometimes, late at night when she was alone with that beautiful grand piano, Maria would feel a deep sadness in her chest. She would think about all the music trapped inside her, all the songs she could play but would never get to share. She would imagine what it would feel like to sit at that bench, to feel the smooth keys under her fingers, to hear her music fill the entire hall with sound. Then she would pack up her cleaning supplies, turn off the lights, and go home to practice on her cardboard piano. Because even if no one would ever hear her play, even if she would never get to touch those real keys, she couldn't stop learning. The music had become part of her soul, and she needed it like she needed air to breathe. Maria never imagined that one day her secret would be discovered. She never thought that the professors who barely noticed her existence would one day ask her to play. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever, and that the piano she had admired from a distance would soon become the instrument of her transformation. For now, she was content to be the invisible woman who cleaned the music building, who listened to classical music through earbuds, who practiced on a cardboard piano in her small apartment. She was content to dream and hope and prepare for a moment that might never come, but that moment was coming, sooner than she knew. The annual faculty dinner was always held in the concert hall, and this year was no different. Maria had been asked to work extra hours to help set up the event. She didn't mind the overtime pay, and she was curious to see how the teachers acted. When they weren't in their classrooms, she arrived early that evening, pushing her cart through the familiar hallways. The building felt different somehow. Instead of the usual quiet emptiness, there was energy in the air. Voices echoed from the concert hall, and she could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses. When Maria entered the main hall, she was surprised by how fancy everything looked. White tablecloths covered the tables she had helped set up earlier. Flowers sat in the center of each table, and the lights had been dimmed to create a warm, cozy feeling. The grand piano, her beloved grand piano, had been pushed to one side to make room for all the tables. The teachers were already arriving, dressed in their nicest clothes. Maria recognized most of them, but they looked so different outside of their usual work attire. Professor Williams, the music department head, was wearing a sharp black suit instead of his usual casual jacket. Dr. Peterson, the piano instructor, had traded his everyday sweater for a crisp white shirt and tie. Maria tried to stay invisible as she worked, arranging the last few chairs and making sure the water glasses were filled. But she couldn't help listening to the conversations around her. The teachers were talking about their summer vacation plans, their research projects, and funny stories about their students. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere became more relaxed. Wine was served with dinner, and the conversations grew louder and more animated. Maria had finished most of her setup work, but she stayed to help clear empty plates and refill water pitchers. She was wiping down a table in the corner when she heard her name called out, "Hey, Maria!" The voice belonged to Dr. Peterson, who was sitting at a table with several other music faculty members. His face was slightly flushed from the wine, and he had a big smile on his face. Maria looked up, surprised. The professors rarely addressed her directly and never by name. "Yes, sir?" she replied quietly, still holding her cleaning cloth. "Come over here for a minute," Dr. Peterson said, gesturing with his wine glass. "We want to ask you something." Maria hesitated. She preferred to stay in the background, especially during events like this. But the professor was looking at her expectantly, and she didn't want to be rude. She walked over to their table, feeling self-conscious about her cleaning uniform among all the nicely dressed faculty members. "Maria, you've been working in our music building for what, 3 years now?" Dr. Peterson asked, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, sir." 3 years, Maria confirmed, wondering where this conversation was heading. "And you're here every single evening, cleaning around all our beautiful instruments," he continued. "Tell me, have you ever been curious about the music we make here?" Maria felt her heart start to beat faster. Did he know about her secret? Had someone seen her lingering in the concert hall, listening to the practice sessions? I like music, sir," she said carefully. The other professors at the table were now paying attention to the conversation. Professor Williams sat down his wine glass and looked at Maria with interest. "What kind of music do you like, Maria?" he asked. Maria felt trapped. She couldn't tell them about her hours of listening to classical music, about her cardboard piano, about her dreams of playing. "All kinds," she said simply. Dr. Peterson's smile grew wider. "Well, we have this magnificent piano right here," he said, gesturing toward the grand piano that had been pushed to the side. "It's just sitting there, not being used. Don't you think it's a shame?" Maria nodded, not sure what else to do. She could feel the attention of the entire table focused on her, and it made her uncomfortable. "You know what I think?" Dr. Peterson continued, his voice getting louder and more animated. "I think Maria here has probably wondered what it would be like to play our beautiful piano. Haven't you, Maria?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria felt her cheeks burning. The professors were all looking at her now, some with curious expressions, others with barely concealed amusement. She realized that this was becoming some kind of entertainment for them. I don't know how to play," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, come on," Dr. Peterson exclaimed. "You don't need to know how to play to have some fun with it. Look, we're all having a good time here. Why don't you go over there and just see what happens?" Professor Williams joined in, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being in charge. "It's our faculty appreciation dinner, Maria. Everyone should get to participate. Consider it part of the evening's entertainment." Maria felt sick to her stomach. She realized that they saw this as a joke, a way to amuse themselves at her expense. They wanted to watch the cleaning lady make a fool of herself at the piano. They had no idea that she had spent countless hours studying the instrument, learning its secrets, dreaming of the moment when she could finally touch those keys. "I really can't," she said, trying to back away from the table. "I have work to finish," but Dr. Peterson wasn't giving up. "The work can wait," he said, standing up from his chair. "How often do you get a chance like this?" "Trust me, I'm a piano teacher. I give you permission to play around on it." Other professors began to chime in, their voices growing more insistent. "Go ahead, Maria," one of them said. "Don't be shy." Another added, "It's just for fun. No one expects you to be any good." That last comment stung. Maria felt a mixture of hurt and anger rising in her chest. They were talking about her like she was a child, like she was incapable of doing anything meaningful. They had no idea what she was capable of. "Come on, everyone," Professor Williams said, raising his voice to address the entire room. "Let's encourage Maria to give us a little performance." The conversation at other tables died down as people turned to see what was happening. Maria found herself the center of attention in a room full of educated, successful people who saw her as nothing more than a source of amusement. Dr. Peterson walked over to the piano and patted the bench. "Look, I'll even adjust the seat for you," he said with exaggerated helpfulness. "Just sit down and hit some keys." "What's the worst that could happen?" Maria stood frozen, torn between the desire to run away and something else entirely. A part of her, the part that had dreamed of this moment for 3 years, was actually excited. This was her chance. Not the way she had imagined it, not with the respect and recognition she had dreamed of, but still a chance. "I promise I won't judge you," Dr. Peterson said, though his grin suggested otherwise. "I'm a very understanding teacher." The room had grown quiet now. All eyes on Maria. She could feel the weight of their expectations, their assumption that she would embarrass herself, that she would confirm their beliefs about who she was and what she was capable of. Maria looked at the piano, then at the faces surrounding her. She thought about her cardboard keyboard at home, about the hours of practice, about the music that lived in her heart. She thought about the beautiful pieces she had learned, the emotions she had taught herself to express through silent finger movements. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. The silence in the room felt thick and heavy. Maria could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as dozens of eyes stared at her, waiting for her response. The professors had created a moment of entertainment for themselves, and now they were all expecting her to play along. "Don't keep us waiting," called out Professor Martinez from across the room. "We're all curious to see what you can do." His tone was playful, but Maria could hear the underlying assumption that she would fail spectacularly. Dr. Peterson was still standing by the piano, one hand resting on the polished black surface. "Look, Maria, I know this might seem scary, but it's really not a big deal. Just pretend you're playing around at home. We've all been beginners before." The word beginners hit Maria like a slap. If only they knew how many hours she had spent studying their instrument, how many sleepless nights she had practiced on her cardboard piano, how many pieces she had memorized note by note. But they saw her as someone who had never even touched a piano before. "Maybe she's too nervous," suggested Dr. Chun, the violin instructor. "It's perfectly normal to have stage fright." "There's nothing to be nervous about," Professor Williams assured her with a patronizing smile. "We're all friends here. No one expects perfection from someone who's never played before." Maria felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. Part of her wanted to run away, to go back to her cleaning cart and pretend this whole thing had never happened. But another part of her was growing angry at their condescending attitudes. They were treating her like a child, like someone who couldn't possibly have any real talent or knowledge. "Come on, Maria," Dr. Peterson said, his voice getting slightly impatient. "Don't overthink it. Just sit down and play whatever comes to mind. Even if it's just chopsticks or happy birthday, we'll all clap and have a good laugh." The mention of chopsticks made Maria's hands clench into fists. She had learned to play Chopin's most complex pieces on her silent keyboard, and they were suggesting she might manage a children's tune. The disrespect was overwhelming. "I really think I should get back to work," Maria said, her voice stronger than before. "You all are having such a nice dinner, and I don't want to interrupt." "Nonsense." Professor Williams stood up from his chair, clearly enjoying his role as the evening's host. "This is part of the fun. Besides, when will you get another chance? Like this? This piano is worth more than most people's cars?" Other faculty members began to join in, their voices creating a chorus of encouragement that felt more like pressure. "Go ahead, Maria. Don't be shy. It'll be fun." "We promise we won't laugh." But Maria could see the smirks on some faces. The way certain professors were already pulling out their phones, probably to record what they expected to be an amusing disaster. She realized that win or lose, she was about to become a story they would tell for years to come. "Tell you what," Dr. Peterson said, moving closer to Maria. "I'll make it even easier for you. Just play one note. Any note. That's all. Just press One key and we'll call it good. The suggestion was so insulting that Maria felt her anger finally overcome her fear. One note? They thought she was so incompetent that pressing a single key would be an achievement worth celebrating. Or maybe, added Professor Davis with a chuckle, you could just sit at the bench and pretend to play. We could all pretend to hear beautiful music. The laughter that followed this comment was the last straw. Maria had spent 3 years listening to these people talk about music as if it were the most important thing in the world. She had heard them discuss the emotional power of piano music, the technical skill required to master the instrument, the years of dedication needed to become truly proficient, and now they were suggesting she fake it for their amusement. Actually, Maria said, her voice cutting through the chatter, I think I will try. The room fell quiet again. Dr. Peterson's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Really? That's wonderful. I knew you had it in you. Maria started walking toward the piano, her legs feeling unsteady. With each step, she could feel the weight of all those eyes on her. The professors were probably expecting her to stumble through a few random notes, maybe bang on the keys like a toddler, give them a good story to share at future faculty gatherings. But as she got closer to the instrument, Maria felt something unexpected happening. The anger was transforming into something else. Determination. 3 years of secret practice. 3 years of dreaming about this moment. 3 years of imagining what it would feel like to sit at this exact bench and touch these exact keys. Take your time, Dr. Peterson said, moving back to give her space. Remember, there's no pressure. Just have fun with it. Maria reached the piano and stopped. Up close, it was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The keys were perfectly white and black, arranged in the familiar pattern she had memorized from her cardboard version. She could see her reflection in the polished surface. Distorted but recognizable. She thought about all the times she had cleaned this piano, carefully dusting each key, polishing the wood until it gleamed. She had touched this instrument hundreds of times, but never like this. Never with the intention of making music. The bench adjusts if you need it higher or lower, Dr. Peterson offered helpfully. Though I think it's probably at the right height for you. Maria sat down on the bench and immediately felt how different it was from the chair she used at home. This bench was the perfect height, the perfect distance from the keys. Her feet reached the pedals naturally, something she had only dreamed about. She placed her hands on her lap and looked out at the room full of expectant faces. Some looked genuinely curious, others seemed barely able to contain their amusement. A few professors had their phones ready, clearly planning to capture whatever happened next. Whenever you're ready, Professor Williams said encouragingly. Don't worry about making mistakes, that's how we all learn. Maria took a deep breath and slowly raised her hands toward the keys. The moment her fingers made contact with the smooth surface, she felt an electric shock of connection. These were real keys, keys that would make real sound when she pressed them. After 3 years of silent practice, she was finally going to hear her music, but what should she play? Her mind raced through all the pieces she had learned. Should she start with something simple, something that wouldn't completely shock them? Or should she show them exactly what she was capable of? The professors were starting to shift in their seats, waiting for her to begin. Some were exchanging glances, probably wondering how long this would take and when they could get back to their dinner and wine. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, trying to decide. In that moment of silence, she made a choice that would change everything. She would not play it safe. She would not pretend to be less than she was. She would play with everything she had and let the music speak for itself. Her fingers found their position on the keys, and she opened her eyes. It was time to show them who she really was. Maria's hands hovered over the keys for what felt like forever. The room was so quiet she could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Every professor in the hall was watching her, waiting for whatever amateur attempt they expected to witness. She could feel Dr. Peterson shifting his weight behind her, probably getting ready to offer more helpful suggestions. Professor Williams was leaning forward in his chair, his expression a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed amusement. A few faculty members had their phones positioned to record, ready to capture what they assumed would be an embarrassing moment, but Maria was thinking about something completely different. She was remembering the first time she had heard classical piano music, that night when she had found the student's phone. She was thinking about all the evenings she had spent with her cardboard keyboard, her fingers moving silently through complex pieces while her heart soared with the music only she could hear. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment. 3 years of secret practice, of studying finger positions from YouTube videos, of memorizing every note of the greatest piano compositions ever written. The professors expected her to fumble through a simple children's song, but Maria had something very different in mind. She took one last deep breath and let her fingers settle onto the keys. The moment her skin touched the smooth ivory, she felt a connection she had never experienced before. These keys were responsive, waiting for her touch to bring them to life. This was nothing like her cardboard piano at home. Without any more hesitation, Maria began to play. The first chord that emerged from the piano was so unexpected that several professors actually jumped in their seats. It wasn't a tentative, uncertain sound. It was rich and full and perfectly executed. Maria's fingers found their positions with the confidence of someone who had practiced this exact moment 1,000 times. She had chosen to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful and technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. It was a bold choice, something that would immediately reveal her true skill level to anyone who knew music. Dr. Peterson's mouth fell open as he recognized the piece. This wasn't a beginner's attempt at making noise. This was serious music, played with serious skill. The opening melody flowed from the piano like water, each note perfectly placed, each phrase shaped with musical understanding that took years to develop. Professor Williams had been reaching for his wine glass when the music started. Now his hand was frozen halfway to the table, his eyes wide with shock. He knew this piece well, had taught it to advanced students, and he could tell immediately that Maria was playing it with a level of proficiency that rivaled his best pupils. The room had gone completely silent except for the music. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses were set down without their owners even realizing they had moved. Every person in the hall was trying to process what they were hearing. Maria was lost in the music now, her body moving naturally with the rhythm and flow of the piece. Her left hand provided the gentle accompaniment while her right hand sang the melody with such expression that it seemed to tell a story. This was everything she had dreamed of, everything she had worked toward during those long nights of silent practice. The professors who had been joking and laughing just moments before were now sitting in stunned silence. They were witnessing something they had never expected, something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who cleaned their building. Dr. Peterson, who had initiated this whole situation as a light-hearted joke, felt his face burning with embarrassment. He had spent his entire career teaching piano to college students, and he could tell that Maria was playing with a level of skill that surpassed many of his advanced pupils. The technique was flawless, the musicality was sophisticated, and the emotional expression was absolutely genuine. As Maria continued to play, transitioning into the more complex middle section of the Nocturne, the professors began to realize the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just someone who had picked up a few basics from YouTube videos. This was a serious musician, someone who had studied the instrument with dedication and passion. Professor Martinez, who had been recording on his phone expecting to capture something amusing, found himself lowering the device. What he was witnessing felt too profound, too personal to be turned into a casual video. This was a moment of genuine artistry, and it demanded respect. The music filled every corner of the concert hall, the acoustics carrying each note with crystal clarity. Maria's fingers moved across the keys with a grace and precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. The difficult passages that would challenge even advanced students flowed effortlessly under her touch. Some of the professors were beginning to recognize not just the technical skill, but the deep musical understanding that Maria was demonstrating. The way she shaped each phrase, The subtle timing variations that gave the music its emotional impact, the perfect balance between the melody and accompaniment. These were things that couldn't be faked or stumbled upon by accident. Dr. Chun, the violin instructor, felt tears forming in her eyes. She had spent decades in the music world, and she knew real talent when she heard it. What Maria was playing wasn't just technically correct, it was deeply moving, filled with the kind of emotional honesty that separated true musicians from mere technicians. As the piece moved toward its climax, Maria's playing became even more expressive. Her whole body was involved now, swaying gently with the music, her face showing the concentration and joy of someone completely absorbed in the act of creation. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of her soul. The professors who had been expecting to be entertained by her failure were, instead, being educated about their own prejudices. They had assumed that someone in Maria's position couldn't possibly have hidden depths, couldn't possibly have spent years developing a skill they knew nothing about, but the music didn't lie. Every note that flowed from the piano was evidence of Maria's dedication, her talent, and her deep love for the art form. She wasn't just playing the notes correctly, she was interpreting them, expressing them, making them her own. Professor Williams felt a profound sense of shame washing over him. He had spent his career teaching students to respect music, to understand its power and beauty, and yet he had been ready to treat it as a joke when it came to Maria, the woman who had cleaned around his precious instruments for 3 years had been secretly mastering them. As Maria approached the final section of the nocturne, the room seemed to hold its breath. The music was building to its conclusion, each note carefully placed, each phrase perfectly shaped. The professors were no longer thinking about their dinner or their wine or their casual entertainment. They were completely absorbed in the performance, and Maria, the invisible woman who had spent 3 years dreaming of this moment, was finally sharing her gift with the world. The music poured from her fingers with years of pent-up emotion, with the joy of finally being heard, with the satisfaction of proving that talent and passion could emerge from the most unexpected places. The last notes of the nocturne were approaching, and with them the moment when Maria would have to face the shocked expressions of everyone who had so casually dismissed her. The final notes of the Chopin nocturne hung in the air like delicate crystals, slowly fading into silence. Maria's hands remained poised above the keys for a moment, her eyes still closed, savoring the last echoes of the music she had just created. For 3 years she had imagined this feeling, but nothing could have prepared her. For the reality of it, the silence that followed was unlike anything the concert hall had ever experienced. It wasn't the polite pause that usually came after a student performance or the brief quiet before scattered applause. This was the stunned silence of people whose entire understanding of the world had just been turned upside down. Maria slowly opened her eyes and turned to face the room. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the hall was staring at her with expressions of complete shock. Professor Williams was frozen with his mouth hanging open. Dr. Peterson looked like he had just seen a ghost. Some of the other faculty members were blinking rapidly, as if trying to make sure they weren't dreaming. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Maria began to worry that she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she had overstepped. Maybe they were angry that she had deceived them about her abilities. Maybe she was about to lose her job. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room came a single sound, a slow clap, then another, and another. Dr. Chun, the violin instructor, was the first to break the spell. She rose from her chair, her eyes shining with tears, and began to applaud. The sound seemed to wake everyone else from their trance. Suddenly, the entire room erupted. Professor Williams jumped to his feet so quickly that his chair toppled backward. "Incredible," he shouted, clapping his hands above his head. "Absolutely incredible." Dr. Peterson was shaking his head in disbelief, applauding so hard his hands were turning red. "I can't believe it," he kept saying. "I just can't believe it." One by one, every person in the room stood up. The applause grew louder and more enthusiastic with each passing second. Professors who had been casually dismissive just minutes before were now cheering and whistling like they were at a rock concert. "Bravo!" called out Professor Martinez, pumping his fist in the air. "Bravo!" The standing ovation seemed to go on forever. Maria sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. Her hands were shaking now, but not from nerves. She was shaking from the pure emotion of finally being seen, finally being heard, finally being recognized for who she really was. Dr. Peterson was the first to approach her, and Maria was surprised to see that he had tears streaming down his face. "Maria," he said, his voice choked with emotion, I don't know what to say. That was was extraordinary." "How long have you been playing?" Professor Williams asked, rushing over to join them. His earlier condescending tone was completely gone. Replaced by genuine respect and curiosity, Maria looked at the crowd of professors gathering around the piano. These were the same people who had been treating her as entertainment just a few minutes ago, but now they were looking at her with the kind of admiration usually reserved for visiting concert artists. "I taught myself," she said quietly, still not quite believing this was really happening. "Taught yourself?" Dr. Peterson's eyes widened even further. "You mean you've never had formal lessons?" Maria shook her head. "I learned from videos. And, I practiced lot." The professors exchanged amazed glances. They knew how difficult it was to achieve that level of skill even with years of professional instruction. The idea that someone could reach such heights through self-study was almost impossible to believe. "What else can you play?" asked Dr. Chun, her voice filled with excitement. Before Maria could answer, Professor Williams held up his hand. "Wait," he said. "Just wait a minute. I need to understand something." He looked directly at Maria. "You've been working here for 3 years. You've been around our piano program, our students, our faculty, and you never said anything about your abilities?" Maria felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "I didn't think, I'm just a cleaning lady. I didn't think anyone would be interested." "Just the cleaning lady?" Dr. Peterson repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. "Maria, what you just played, I have graduate students who couldn't perform that piece with half your skill and musicality." The other professors nodded in agreement. Several of them were still wiping tears from their eyes, clearly moved by what they had witnessed. "That wasn't just technically perfect," added Dr. Chun. "The interpretation, the emotion, the musical understanding, that was the work of a true artist." Maria felt her own eyes filling with tears. For 3 years, she had dreamed of being recognized as a musician. She had imagined scenarios where people would discover her talent and praise her abilities. But she had never expected anything like this. The genuine emotion in their voices, the way they were looking at her now, it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. "I have to ask," said Professor Williams, still shaking his head in amazement. "Where did you practice? How did you develop this level of skill without access to a piano?" Maria felt embarrassed to tell them about her keyboard, but their faces were so open and interested that she found herself explaining. "I made a piano out of cardboard," she said. "I drew the keys and practiced on that." The professors looked at each other in stunned silence. The idea that someone could develop such extraordinary skill practicing on a silent, homemade instrument was beyond their comprehension. "You practiced on cardboard," Dr. Peterson said slowly, as if testing the words to make sure he had heard correctly. "And you achieved this level of proficiency. How many hours a day?" asked Professor Martinez. 2 or 3 hours most nights," Maria replied. "Sometimes more on weekends." The faculty members were clearly struggling to process this information. They understood the dedication required to master classical piano, but the idea that someone could do it under such circumstances was revolutionizing their understanding of what was possible. "Maria," Professor Williams said, his voice taking on a serious tone, "I hope you understand that what you've just demonstrated is extraordinary. This isn't just a hobby or a casual skill. This is professional-level artistry." "I've been teaching piano for 25 years," added Dr. Peterson. and I can count on one hand the number of students I've had who could play with your level of musicality and technical precision." The applause started up again, this time more sustained and enthusiastic than before. Maria looked around the room at all these educated, accomplished people who were celebrating her talent, and she felt a surge of pride she had never experienced before. But the professors weren't finished. Dr. Chun stepped forward, her expression serious. "Maria, I have to ask you something important. What are your plans? What do you want to do with this incredible gift you have?" The question hung in the air, and Maria realized that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. The secret she had kept for 3 years was out, and there was no going back to being invisible. The professors were waiting for her answer, their faces full of expectation and hope. They had discovered something remarkable, and they weren't going to let it go unnoticed. Maria stared at Dr. Chun, her mind racing to process the question about her future plans. For 3 years, she had dreamed of this moment, but she had never actually thought beyond it. In her fantasies, the discovery of her talent was always the ending of the story, not the beginning. I don't know," she said honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought anyone would find out." Professor Williams stepped closer, his expression intense with excitement. "Maria, you have to understand something. What you just demonstrated isn't just impressive for someone who's self-taught. It's impressive, period. You have the kind of natural talent that music schools search for." The other professors were nodding in agreement, their faces showing a mixture of amazement and something else Maria couldn't quite identify. It looked almost like guilt. Dr. Peterson ran his hands through his hair, still shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't stop thinking about this," he said. "All this time we've had a virtuoso pianist working in our building, and we treated her like she was invisible." "Because that's what I wanted," Maria said quickly. "I liked being invisible. It was safe." "Safe from what?" asked Dr. Chun gently. Maria looked around the room at all the expectant faces. These people lived in a world of education and opportunities, of conferences and competitions and career advancement. They couldn't understand what it was like to be someone like her. "Safe from being disappointed," she said finally. "Safe from wanting things I could never have." The silence that followed was different from the stunned quiet after her performance. This was an uncomfortable silence, the kind that happens when people realize they've been part of a problem they never noticed. Professor Williams cleared his throat. "Maria, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever thought about pursuing music professionally?" "Every day," Maria answered without hesitation. "But thinking about something and being able to do it are two different things." "What if they weren't?" Dr. Peterson asked, stepping forward. "What if there was a way for you to pursue music seriously?" Maria felt her heart start racing again. "What do you mean?" The professors exchanged glances, and she could see them having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, Professor Williams spoke up. "The college has programs," he said carefully. "Scholarships for exceptional students. Ways to help people who show extraordinary promise." "But I'm not a student," Maria protested. "I'm 34 years old. I never even finished high school." "None of that matters," Dr. Chun said firmly. "Talent doesn't have an expiration date. And music education isn't just for teenagers fresh out of high school." Dr. Peterson was pacing now, his excitement building. "We have adult learner programs. We have scholarships for non-traditional students. And frankly, after what I just witnessed, I think any music school in the country would be lucky to have you." Maria felt dizzy. This conversation was moving too fast, offering possibilities she had never allowed herself to seriously consider. "I can't afford college," she said. "I need to work. I have bills to pay." "What if you didn't have to choose?" Professor Williams asked. "What if there was a way to keep working while also studying music?" The other professors were getting more animated now. Clearly inspired by the possibilities, Dr. Martinez spoke up for the first time since the performance. "The college has work-study programs," he said. "Students can maintain employment while taking classes, and given your unique situation, I think we could make special arrangements." Maria felt overwhelmed. 20 minutes ago, she had been the invisible cleaning lady. Now these respected professors were talking about scholarships and special arrangements and college programs as if she belonged in their world. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this for me?" Dr. Peterson stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "Because we've just witnessed something extraordinary, and we'd be failing in our duty as educators if we didn't try to nurture it. Also," added Dr. Chun with a rueful smile, "because we owe you an apology. We've been blind to who you really are, and that's on us." Professor Williams nodded. "We assumed we knew everything about the people in our building. We were wrong, and we're sorry." The apology hung in the air, and Maria felt something shift inside her chest. These people who had seemed so far above her just an hour ago were admitting their mistakes and treating her as an equal. "But even if I could take classes," Maria said, voicing her deepest fear, "I don't know if I'm good enough. What I just played, that might be the best I can do." Dr. Peterson laughed, but it wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just heard something absurd. "Maria," he said, "what you just played was a graduate-level performance. And you told us you learned it from YouTube videos while practicing on cardboard. Do you have any idea what you could accomplish with proper instruction and a real piano to practice on?" The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Maria had spent so long dreaming of having access to a real piano that she had never imagined what might come after that. "We could start small," Dr. Chun suggested. "Maybe you could audit one class, see how it feels, no pressure, no commitments. And," added Professor Williams, "I think I can speak for all of us when I say that you would be welcome to use our practice rooms. You shouldn't have to practice on cardboard anymore." Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes again. The idea of having access to real pianos, of being able to practice without silence, of learning from actual teachers instead of trying to figure everything out on her own, it was almost too much to hope for. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," Professor Williams replied. "This is a big decision. But Maria, I want you to know that what happened here tonight ... This isn't going to be forgotten. You've shown us something remarkable, and we're not going to let that go to waste." Dr. Peterson nodded enthusiastically. "I'm going to be thinking about your performance for weeks. The musicality, the technical skill, the emotion. It was genuinely moving and inspiring," added Dr. Chun. "You've reminded all of us why we became musicians in the first place." Maria looked around the room at these professors who had gone from treating her as entertainment to treating her as a colleague. The transformation was almost as unbelievable as her own journey from invisible cleaning lady to celebrated musician. "What would I study?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. The professors smiled, recognizing that she was beginning to seriously consider their offer. "Whatever you want," Professor Williams said. "Piano performance, music theory, composition. The world would be open to you." For the first time in her life, Maria began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her dreams weren't impossible after all. Maybe the cardboard piano and the silent practice sessions and the years of secret longing had been preparing her for this moment. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible and start being the musician she had always known she could be. The faculty dinner had officially ended, but nobody seemed ready to leave. Small groups of professors continued to gather around Maria, each wanting to share their thoughts about what they had just witnessed. The wine glasses sat forgotten on tables as the evening transformed into something none of them had expected. Dr. Peterson pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts. "I have to call someone," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "Maria, would you mind if I contacted a colleague of mine at the State University? She runs their adult education music program, and I think she needs to hear about you." Maria felt panic rising in her chest. "Tonight? You want to call someone tonight?" "Not if you're not comfortable with it," Professor Williams said quickly, shooting Dr. Peterson a warning look. "But Maria, you have to understand that what happened here tonight is extraordinary. People in the music world need to know about talent like yours. The idea of strangers talking about her made Maria feel exposed and vulnerable. For 3 years, her secret had been safe. Now it felt like it was spinning out of her control. What would they want from me? She asked nervously. Dr. Chun sat down next to her on the piano bench. Nothing you're not ready to give, she said gently. But they might want to offer you opportunities. Chances to perform, to study, to grow as a musician. Professor Martinez had been quiet since the performance, but now he spoke up. Maria, can I ask you something? What piece would you play if you had the chance to perform in a real concert hall for an audience that came specifically to hear music? The question caught Maria off guard. She had spent so many nights imagining exactly that scenario, but she had never expected anyone to actually ask her about it. I've always wanted to play Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, she said without hesitation. The full piece with an orchestra. The professors exchanged amazed glances. The Rachmaninoff Second was one of the most challenging and beloved pieces in the piano repertoire. It required not just technical skill, but the kind of musical maturity that usually took decades to develop. You know the entire concerto? Dr. Peterson asked, his voice filled with awe. I've practiced it on my cardboard piano, Maria admitted. I know it's probably not the same as playing it for real, but I've memorized every note. Professor Williams shook his head slowly. Maria, that concerto is 40 minutes long. It's one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written for piano. Professional pianists spend years preparing to perform it. I know, Maria said quietly. That's why. I never thought I'd actually get to play it. The silence that followed was filled with possibility. Each professor was imagining what it would be like to hear Maria perform such a monumental work. They had already witnessed her ability to bring deep emotion and technical precision to a complex nocturne. The idea of her tackling a full concerto was both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. Dr. Chun's phone buzzed and she glanced at it absently. Then her expression changed completely. Oh my goodness, she said, staring at the screen. What is it? Professor Williams asked. Professor Thompson from the conservatory just texted me. Someone posted a video of Maria's performance on social media. It's already been shared dozens of times. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. A video? Someone recorded me? Dr. Peterson looked guilty. I think a few people might have started recording when you began playing. But Maria, this isn't a bad thing. Look at the comments. Dr. Chun held up her phone so Maria could see the screen. The video was grainy and shot from someone's seat across the room, but the audio was clear. And the comments section was exploding with responses. Incredible talent. Who is this woman? This gave me chills. Why isn't she performing professionally? Most beautiful performance I've heard in years. Maria read comment after comment, each one expressing amazement and admiration for her playing. People were sharing the video with their friends, tagging music lovers they knew, asking for more information about the mysterious pianist. This is going viral, Professor Martinez said, reading over her shoulder. Look, it already has over 1,000 views, and it was just posted an hour ago. Maria didn't know whether to feel excited or terrified. She had spent 3 years hiding her talent, and now it was being broadcast to the world without her permission. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she said, her voice shaking. Professor Williams sat down on her other side. Maria, I understand. This feels overwhelming, but look at these comments. Look at how your music is affecting people. Isn't this what every musician dreams of? Touching people's hearts through their art? The truth was, it was exactly what she had dreamed of. In her fantasies, she had imagined audiences being moved by her performances, critics praising her interpretations, other musicians respecting her abilities. But the reality of it happening so suddenly felt overwhelming. Dr. Peterson's phone rang, and he glanced at the caller ID. It's my colleague from the State University, he said. Someone must have sent her the video. Answer it, Dr. Chun urged. This could be the beginning of something amazing. Maria watched as Dr. Peterson stepped away to take the call. She could hear fragments of his conversation. Yes, that's her. No formal training, absolutely extraordinary. I'll ask her. When he hung up, his face was glowing with excitement. Maria, Professor Johnson wants to know if you would be interested in auditioning for their graduate program. Based on that video alone, she's prepared to offer you a full scholarship. The room went quiet again. A full scholarship to a graduate music program was the kind of opportunity that professional musicians competed fiercely for. And it was being offered to Maria based on a single performance that had happened by accident. Graduate program? Maria repeated weakly. But I never even went to college. That doesn't matter, Professor Williams said firmly. Exceptional talent creates its own rules. If you can perform at that level, formal education becomes a technicality. Dr. Chun's phone was buzzing constantly now with notifications. Maria, you need to see this. The video is being shared by musicians all over the country. Look, the principal pianist from the City Symphony just commented. She wants to know if you're available for a collaboration. Maria felt like she was living in a dream. This morning, she had been the invisible cleaning lady. Tonight, professional musicians were reaching out to her. Universities were offering scholarships, and thousands of people were sharing her performance. Online, what do I do? She asked, looking around at the professors who had witnessed her transformation. Whatever feels right to you, Professor Williams said. But Maria, opportunities like this don't come around often. When the music world takes notice of someone the way it's taking notice of you tonight, it's usually for a very good reason. Dr. Peterson was already back on his phone, this time recording a voice message. I'm calling everyone I know in the music industry, he explained. They need to hear about you. Maria realized that her life had changed completely in the span of 2 hours. She was no longer the woman with the secret talent and the cardboard piano. She was becoming someone new, someone who belonged in the world of concert halls and conservatories, and professional musicians. The transformation was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. But as she looked around at the professors who were now working tirelessly to help her succeed, Maria began to understand that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop hiding and start becoming the musician she had always been meant to be.